So my talk is mostly intended to illustrate or explain what are the microscope, how they work, what are their strengths, and then I will also display some of the results obtained using this microscope. So needless to state that any microscope or every microscope consists of some building blocks, like you have a source, illumination source, then lenses, specimen, and a detector. So generally, a source emits the radiations or particles, whatever you are using for capturing the image. And since the source emits the radiations in all direction, sample is of finite size. Most of the radiations emitted from the source are useless from the point of application because you have a sample of finite size. And the interaction will depend on what is the intensity arriving per unit area on the sample. So you have to gather or take these outgoing radiations or particles and bring them on the surface so that you get more intensity. For that, you require a condensing lenses. Condense means to bring together. And then either the reflected output in case of visible light or the transmitted output is used to make the image. So you can make use of various sources like light rays. Light rays means for science students or teachers, it's the range of electromagnetic radiations possessing lambda between 400 nanometer to 800 nanometer. So only those electromagnetic radiations having this wavelength range 400 nanometer to 800 nanometer is sensitive to human retina, and it is used to generate the image in the on the human retina. So this range of electromagnetic photons is called as visible photon or light rays. One can also make use of electrons. Whether one can use ions, the question is answered in affirmative manner. From last almost 8 to 10 years, we have ion microscope also, helium ion microscope in market. X-ray microscopy is different. It is not used for obtaining the general images like to get the information about shape, size or dimensions. It's a different microscopy. So in addition to this conventional microscope, conventional means wherein we have an illumination source. Next generation microscopes were introduced in 90s, where you don't have any kind of illumination source. Without illumination source, you can get the image of the sample or information about the sample, and that is obtained via interaction of a very sharp tip called as probe and the surface. So these are called as scanning probe microscopes. So tomorrow I will explain in detail what are the scanning probe microscope and how they are useful in the context of nanomaterials. Now for any microscope, one of the prime concern is what is the resolution it offers. So resolution can be understood in an easier manner that I have illustrated the intensity profiles on the detector. The green graph shows the intensity profiles on the detector, and the left hand side green circle denotes presence of an object. So let's have an object. So if there is an object, then corresponding to that object, there will be an intensity profile detected on the detector. Means there is an object present in the field of view. Now let us bring another object in the vicinity of the first one. So on the detector, you will record two intensity profiles, again indicating that there are two objects. Now let us try to bring these two objects close to each other. So as a result, the intensity profiles on the detectors will also approach each other, and at a particular separation on the detector, you will see that the two intensity profiles have merged into each other. So when on the detector, it indicates that there is a single intensity profile, means there is only one object. But in reality, we know that there are two objects, but which are closely spaced to each other. So it means that at this separation, the instrument is not able to resolve them, because on the detector we get only one intensity profile indicating presence of only one object. So this is what is defined as a resolution. So what is the minimum separation between the two objects that one can, or the detector can identify them as two separate entities? So that is given by the Rayleigh criteria. So empirically, the Rayleigh criteria gives the resolution as 0.61 lambda divided by n sine alpha, where lambda is the wavelength of the incident radiation, n is the refractive index of the lens materials, and alpha is the solid angle subtended by the radiations. You also see a graphical representation of the intensity profile. So when the intensity of the second object shoots up, emerging from the first intensity profile and then approaches to maximum, so the point from which it begins to appear and the maximum intensity of the first object, so if this difference is less than 30 to is more than 30%, then and then we are sure that, or the instrument is sure that there are two objects. If the difference between the intensities between maximum of the first peak and the emergence of the second peak, if this difference is less than 20% or 30%, then the detector is in the state of dilemma to confirm whether there are two objects or there is a single object. And empirically, this is given by 0.6 lambda by Na. Na is the numerical aperture. So approximating this rule, one can say that depending on the value of Na, but the Na numerical aperture cannot be having a very vivid values or very different values. So finally, for source-based instruments, the thumb rule is that resolution is equal to lambda by 2. So the resolving power of eye on this basis is a human eye can distinguish between any two objects if they are not closer to 0.2 millimeter to each other, that is less than 0.2, means you can say 200 microns. And if you use the numerical thumb rule, lambda resolution equal to lambda by 2, so the lowest or the smallest wavelength is 400 nanometer. So 400 by 2 is 200 nanometer, that is 0.2 micron. So this is for the common optical instruments or optical microscope. So the resolution of optical microscope cannot be higher than 0.2 micron meter or 200 nanometer. So if you want to identify or look anything which have smaller dimensions or objects which are spaced at a distance less than 200 nanometers, optical microscope will not work. And in 60s and 70s, there was a desire to see the biological entities of smaller dimensions. So how one can get the images? Then electron microscopes were introduced. Electron microscopes. So why electron? So the answer is from the de Broglie's hypothesis, or its wave particle duality, that any matter exhibits duality in nature. It can act as a particle or it can act as a wave. And it's a very simple one-liner equation. The wavelength associated with any particle or any matter is lambda equal to h by p, where h is the Planck constant and p is the momentum. Now, if you take a free electron, now for students, I always ask, how do you understand an electron? I cannot pose a question, what is an electron? But as a teacher, I can ask a question, what do you understand by, or how do you understand an electron? So the best understanding is that an electron is a quantum of negative charge. Negative stands for the polarity or sign. It's a quantum of negative charge orbiting around a positively centered nucleus in an atom. Where is an electron? What is it doing? What is its nature? So it is a quantum of electrical charge which is orbiting around a positively centered nucleus in an atom. Since it is bonded with the nucleus, if you break this bond, this quantum of negative charge can be detached from an atom or nucleus, and this is termed as free electron. Being a charged particle, if you apply a potential difference, it can be accelerated or decelerated. So, using the conservation of energy, kinetic energy half mv square equal to the potential energy EV, where V is the strength of the applied potential difference. So when you apply a potential difference of V volt, then the electron gets accelerated. As it moves, it has a more kinetic energy, and from this one can calculate what is the wavelength. Remember, this is a simple non-relativistic mechanics. We are not using the relativistic case here. So with this simple, we get an understanding that if we accelerate an electron with a potential difference of 40 kilovolt, then the corresponding wavelength it will exhibit is of the order of picometers. It is 6 picometer. Now, if you use the thumb rule, then the resolution lambda by 2. So if the wavelength is of the order of picometer, the resolution will be of the order of picometer. But practically this is not possible. But the base is that making use of electron as a source and accelerating these electrons to a certain potential difference so that their corresponding wavelengths will be smaller. As a result, we can get a higher resolution. That was the analogy, and based on this analogy, the electron microscopes were invented or were introduced into the market. So to meet the scientific desire to see the fine details of cells and other biological entities, which required 10,000 x plus magnification, an attempt was made by Max Knoll and Ernst Druska to develop the transmission electron microscope. Now in the lecture, you will see that transmission electron microscope is very difficult to operate and it's very complicated instrument as compared to the scanning electron microscope. But the first attempt was made to design the transmission electron microscope because it was a simple analogy of a transmitted optical microscope. So the components of transmitted optical microscope were replaced by the electron microscope. So you have an optical source, they use an electron source. Sample was there, they used the sample, and then they gathered or they collected the transmitted electrons. In between there were lenses. But the difficulty was that you require very peculiar samples or very thin samples so that the electrons will pass through the material. And because of that, the transmission electron microscope had limited uses. Interestingly, as an Indian, it is pride for us that in 1946 to 48, around this period, one of the professors, Professor N.N. Das Gupta, has constructed a horizontal type of TEM. All the transmission electron microscope, you will see that the electron column is vertical, but in India, the first atom was made by constructing a horizontal column, and not only just making this instrument, Professor Das Gupta has used this instrument for biological specimen characterization, and there are published results. So it is not a fake or just a myth that we had created or we have developed the transmission electron microscope. It was a reality. But as I told you, there are complications in using the transmission electron microscope. Unfortunately, this was not taken up by the next generation. Although the electron microscope, whether it is a scanning electron microscope or transmission electron microscope, the basic two variants based on their operational principles have played very valuable role in evolution of modern science and technology. Whatever the electronic development, industry development we are witnessing today, the microscopy, in particular electron microscopy, has a lion's share in characterizing as well as in fabrication of these devices. But these microscopes were not awarded the Nobel Prize until in 1986, when the next generation microscope, that is the scanning probe microscope, in particular the scanning tunneling microscope, was demonstrated by a team of scientists, Gerd Binning and Heinrich Rohrer at IBM Zurich. And then in 1986, finally, the Nobel Prize was given half to Ernst Ruska for development of electron microscopy and half amount to Gerd Binning and Heinrich Rohrer for their invention of STM and AFM. So based on the working principles, the electron microscopes are categorized into two types. One is scanning electron microscope, another is transmission electron microscope. They have different magnifications and different resolutions, and hence they have different applications. A scanning electron microscope has again different variants or types based on what type of electron source it is using. So based on the type of electron source, we have a simple scanning electron microscope or field emission scanning electron microscope. Depending on the operational conditions and application, we have a biological or environmental scanning electron microscope or cryoscanning electron microscope. The transmission electron microscope has different variants, like we have a HRTEM or we have a Lorentz microscope. In particularly for magnetic samples or magnetic materials, we cannot use the traditional or simple transmission electron microscope. We have to have a Lorentz lenses in the column, so that is called as Lorentz microscopy. And for biological samples, we have a cryo-TEM, and the recent development is the aberration corrected TEM. So the basic components of an electron microscope is an electron gun, that is the source which emits the electron. Then there are lenses, electromagnetic lenses. In contrast to the optical microscope, which is used in the ambient condition, here we require low pressure condition, that is a vacuum. So vacuum system is essential. Number of vacuum pumps are attached to the microscope to maintain the low pressure condition. So depending on the type of electron gun, whether it is a simple thermionic gun or a field emission gun, the order of vacuum requirement is different. Usually in the column, the vacuum is of the order of 10 to the power minus 6 torr or millibar. But if it is a field emission gun, then you require ultra high vacuum condition, that is the pressure should be less than 10 to the power minus 8 millibar or 10 to the power 8 minus 8 torr. Then there are set of detectors for different interactions. You have a sample stage with goniometer, because you are going to scan the sample, that is move the sample. So without breaking the vacuum, externally you can have fixtures which will allow you to move the sample either in X, Y, Z directions. And some control electronic power supply is essential. So this is a schematic. At the top of the column, there is an electron gun. Then you have a set of lenses, condenser lenses, then apertures, mechanical apertures, which will cut down the size of the electron beam. Then you have a scanning coil to move the electron beam onto the sample in raster scans manner. And then you have a set of detectors. So there are two kinds of electron sources or guns used. One is the thermionic source. It's a simple source. You take a tungsten wire or any metallic wire of refractory material like tungsten, tantalum or molybdenum. Put in V-shaped structure, attach it to the two metal electrodes, and when you apply a small potential difference between these two electrodes, there is a flow of current through the tiny wire, and due to Joule heating effect, the temperature of the wire rises, and at particular temperature electron emission takes place. Since the emission is occurring by supply of thermal energy, it is called as thermionic emission. Again, for students, Sir Anderson Richardson was awarded the Nobel Prize for his contribution in thermionic emission. In field emission, it is a purely quantum mechanical process. It refers to as tunneling of electrons from condensed state like a metal into vacuum when you apply very intense electrostatic field of the order of 10 to the power 7 volt per centimeter. And upon application of such very intense electric field, there is a tunneling of electrons from the emitter into vacuum. Our group is has been working in the area of field electron emission characterization or study of electron emission properties of different materials since more than 4 decades. And these studies are they require ultra vacuum conditions, and in the older days before in 80s and 19 to get the ultra vacuum conditions it was very difficult. We used to get the vacuum conditions by operating the pumps continuously for more than 3 days. Then we used to get the low pressure, that is UHV conditions. Nowadays with advancement in the vacuum technology you can get the UHV conditions within 5 to 6 hours. So these are the two kind of electron sources used in the scanning electron microscopes, and the technical differences are listed below. What kind of materials are used commercially? Either you make use of tungsten or lanthanum hexaboride LaB6 because of its low work function. Again, work function is nothing but the amount of energy required to remove an electron from a condensed state into vacuum. So what is the minimum amount of energy required to remove an electron? That is the work function. So minimum the energy, minimum will be the temperature you require. So the operating temperatures are also different for tungsten and LaB6. And if you have the pure field emission, then you also get what is the energy spread. This is one of the parameter of concern as in the context of resolution. Resolution also depends on what is the bandwidth or what is the delta lambda in the source or spread of wavelength in the given source or spread of energy in the given source. If you use nearly monoenergetic beam, you get a better resolution. If the beam is not monoenergetic, then the resolution is hampered. So in case of field emission, the energy spread is very less as compared to the thermal. That's why the resolution when you have a field emission gun is higher as compared to the thermal gun. And that is because the price of these instruments are very different. If you buy a scanning electron microscope with a thermal emission gun or thermionic gun and with all auxiliary attachment, it may cost you around 1.2 to 1.5 crores. But if you want a field emission scanning electron microscope with the same set of auxiliary equipments, you have to pay more than 2 crores rupees. In short, 30 to 40% more amount is to be paid if you want to change the source, because the resolution offered by the scanning electron microscope with thermionic gun is say 50 nanometer, then with field emission gun you have the resolution of 5 nanometer. So there is an increase in the resolution by an order, and for that you have to pay more. And this is the way how you can make a fine beam of electrons which are emitted from the gun. So just by applying electric field or magnetic field, because when you apply external electric or magnetic field, the charge will experience a force. You can apply electric and magnetic field in association, that is, so the resultant Lorentz force will be Q into E plus V cross B. Depending on the directions of applied electric and magnetic field, you can put the electron in a particular trajectory. So this is a very simple physics using the external electric and magnetic field, you can make the electron beam very thin and focus it at a particular position. So when you focus the electron beam onto the sample, let us consider that you have an electron beam accelerated with an energy of say 20 kilo electron volt, and it is incident on the sample. So what kind of interactions will occur? One of the foremost interaction is that the incident electron may get backscattered. So these backscattered electrons are called as primary backscattered electrons. The another most probable interaction is that some of the valence electrons of the atoms will take the energy from the striking electron and will come out. So the incident electron is termed as primary, whereas the ejecting electron emerging from the sample is called secondary. So there is a secondary emission. Third is that since the incident kinetic energy is say 20 keV, 20 kilo electron volt, so with this huge energy, there is a probability that the core shell electron, that is electron near the nucleus, may be knocked out. So when there is a vacancy in the core shell electron, immediately the upper shell electron will fill up this vacancy, and during this interaction, the energy will be emitted. So this energy comes in the form of radiation which falls in the X-ray region. So we have emission of X-ray. Everyone very well knows what is the origin of X-rays or how X-rays are generated. There is also another possibility that when the vacancy, core shell vacancy is filled by an electron jumping from the higher level, so this amount of energy may not be emitted as an X-ray photon, but this energy can be taken up by another electron and it gets ejected. So these electrons which are ejected from the core shell are called as Auger electrons. The spelling is German AUGER, but the pronunciation is Auger. So these are also characteristic electrons, means their energies are definite as per the parent atom from which they are coming. It may happen that the valence electrons will not come out, they may get excited and de-excited. So during de-excitation, they may emit the radiation which falls in the visible. So there are more than one kind of interactions. There is a primary backscattered electron, secondary electrons, then characteristic Auger electrons, then you have emission of X-rays, you have also emission of visible photons, that is cathodoluminescence, and finally you also measure what is the charge received on the sample because electrons are charged particles, so that is called as sample current. So every kind of interaction gives you a valuable information. And the operation. Now as a student, I always used to get confused. How do I know whether the electron above the sample surface is primary backscattered electron or a secondary electron? Because electron, after all, it is a quantum of charge. But the nature has played a vital role. So if you look at the amount of energies with which these primary or secondary electrons come out and the volume or the areas from which they are ejected and their directional characters, they are very well defined. And because of this, if we place the detectors at particular positions and bias them at a particular voltages, we assure that we are collecting majority of the backscattered electrons or majority of the primary backscattered electrons or secondary electrons or the Auger electrons. So different types of detector means electron detectors, but biased at different voltages and placed at different positions enable us to discriminate or identify or collect the desired output. So this is a tear-shaped volume from which different interactions occur. The secondaries, because they have very small energy, so the secondaries which are generated only from the near surface, 5 to 10 atomic layers, they are able to come out. A secondary electron may be generated in the bulk, but it has very small kinetic energy, so it will not travel to the surface and come out. So mostly the secondaries are from very near surface region. The backscattered are from the deeper volume, and the X-rays are from more deeper volume, like that. So the working is very simple. You have a sample and the electron beam, which is a very finely focused beam. So relatively finely focused means what is the dimension? So usually the dimension of electron beam is 5 to 10 nanometer. So such very fine beam is focused onto the sample. When it hits the sample, it will lead to various interactions. Either it will generate the backscattered, it will generate secondaries, or X-rays will be produced, like that. Then for a shorter duration of time, one of the interested interaction is detected. Then the beam moves to the next point, dwells there for certain time. Again, the desired interaction is detected by the detector, and then the beam moves to the next point. So in electron microscope, the image formation occurs point by point. From every point on the specimen, interacted output is collected and used to generate the image. Whereas in case of optical microscope, the photons are made incident in at a time, and the reflected photons or transmitted photons are gathered at a time and image is generated. So there is no point by point formation image in optical microscope, but here the image is formed point by point. So you have to scan the beam on the sample, and for every position there is a pixel ignited on the detector screen or on the screen which displays the image. And these are the positions of the various detectors. So you can see the objective lens means that it's a conical cylinder, and the hole, central hole, allows the electrons to come out and make them incident on the sample. So, and these are the various detectors. You can see the backscatter detector, secondary detector, X-ray detector, that is the EDS detector, mounted at different positions, and they are also biased at different voltages. Although there have been advancement in the electronic of the machine, means softwares, image analysis, image gathering, or on electron focusing, lenses side, but the detectors, there is a list development. The most commonly used detector in the scanning electron microscope is the Everhart-Thornley detector to detect the secondary electrons. So basically, it is a scintillation based detector. The secondary electrons are attracted to the scintillator by providing a bias to the grid, and when these electrons are received at the scintillator, it will emit a pulse of light. So this pulse of light is transported using an optical fiber, and this is taken onto the PMT, that is the photocathode of the PMT. So when this pulse of light is fed to the, or it is made incident on the photocathode of the PMT, it will emit the electrons, and with the help of dynode structure, these electrons will be multiplied. So there is a basic gain, means amplifier. There is a amplification of the electron intensity, and you get the signal. And the image formation, basically in case of secondary, we get the topographic image, means what is the surface or what is the shape and size of the particle. So the information is gathered from the surface because the secondaries come out from the surface. Now the emission of secondary is follows the cosine law along the direction of the normal to the surface. So here you can see there are two particles. One is vertically oriented and another is in a tilted condition. So in case of normal incidence, you have the secondaries going in a cosine law, but when you have a ditch or when you have a corner like this, then the surface normal is in this direction. The angle, the beam comes in this fashion, but there is a curvature. So the surface normal is in this direction. So the secondaries will go along the normal. And here is the detector. So obviously the secondaries emitted from this area will not reach the detector, or the amount of secondaries reaching the detector will be less. As a result, this area will appear as a dark. So you get the contrast. So mathematically, this is given as delta Si is proportional to exponential of A 1 minus cos I, where I is the angle of incidence. In addition to the electrons, you have primary backscattered or secondary electrons used for generating the image. One can also collect the X-rays or detect the X-rays, either measuring their energies or wavelength. So if you measure the energy, the technique is termed as EDAX or EDS, energy dispersive spectrometer, where the X-rays are categorized based on their energies and detected. Another is WDS, wavelength dispersive spectrometer, where the X-rays will be dispersed or categorized based on their wavelength, and then they will be identified. So this allows us, since the X-rays are characteristic one, means the K alpha radiation emitted from copper atom is having a particular wavelength 1.453 angstrom unit. So this lambda 1.543 angstrom unit X-ray wavelength is not available for any other atom. It means that if you detect the X-ray wavelength as 1.543 angstrom unit, you confirm that there is a copper atom a copper atom present in the material. So since X-rays are characteristic of the parent atoms, knowing or detecting these X-rays, one can get the information about the elemental composition. So this is an added advantage in case of scanning electron microscope, that in addition to the topography, we get information about the elemental identification, or also termed as compositional analysis. What type of atoms are present in the material and what are their respective atomic percentage or weight percentage. With a note of caution, elemental analysis and chemical analysis, they are very different. Chemical analysis does not mean only the elemental analysis. Chemical analysis has a deeper sense of understanding in terms of what is the oxidation state of that atom, what is the chemical environment that atom will offer to the surrounding. Elemental information is only referring to whether a particular kind of atom is present or not. So EDAX is used for elemental analysis, not for chemical analysis. Another feature is the magnification. Since the area on which the image is formed on the detector, it is fixed. So if you change the area of scanning, then the ratio will change. So you have a change in magnification. So it appears to be very simple that by just changing the area of the scan or changing the dimensions of scanning area, one can change the magnification. But this is for illustration. In actual microscope, there are lot many things one has to deal with. When you change the area of scanning, at the same time, to get the magnification, you have to also change the working distance. So I will not go into the technical details, but this is a simple illustration that how magnification can be changed. Then what kind of samples one can image, or what kind of samples one can use for the scanning electron microscope. So they should be vacuum compatible, since there is a low pressure in the column and in the electron gun part. And this low pressure is for two reasons. One, when the electrons are emitted from the source, they should travel without collision or with very minimum number of collisions to the sample. In atmosphere, if the electrons are emitted, since there is a large number of atoms or molecules present moving randomly here and there, they will collide with the emitted electron, and the emitted electron will lose its directional characteristic. It will never reach to the sample. So to increase the mean free path, the average distance traveled between two successive collisions, you need to reduce the molecular density. That is, you need to reduce the pressure. So vacuum is required. Second aspect is that in case of thermionic emission, the life of the emitter or cathode depends on the quality of the vacuum or order of vacuum. If you have better vacuum conditions, very high order of vacuum, then the life of the cathode is also extended. So because of these two reasons, you require low pressure conditions in the instrument. So if you take a powder and if it is not a vacuum compatible, it may get evaporated, or the particles may get away with the vacuum pumps, or if it's a biological entity containing water or some liquids, then it may get dehydrated. So these samples you cannot use. Again, you have to use conducting materials because electrons are charged particles. When they are bombarded, they dissipate the charge. So this charge should be taken away. So if the material is electrically conducting, this charge will be taken away and the next electrons will arrive. If this is insulating, the incident electrons will remain there. So they will develop a negative charge and the incident next incoming electrons will be repelled and they will not be able to reach the sample. So if they don't reach the sample, there is no interaction, there is no output, so you don't get the image formation. In case of insulating sample, you can put a very thin conducting coating of gold or platinum or carbon without losing their topography. So insulating samples need to be coated with thin conducting coating before scanning electron microscopy imaging. For research grade, the typical sizes of samples are 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. For powder, you can disperse it on a conducting carbon tape and you can do the imaging. For geological samples, you require a very big sample chamber. So 3-inch, 4-inch diameter or you can say wide samples can be mounted in the sample chamber. But that is a special requirement. And as I told you that for biological sample, this scanning electron microscope are not compatible. So can we have the imaging of these samples or not? The answer is affirmative. So one has to use the environmental scanning electron microscope. These are some of the images, how the images look. So the anodic alumina oxide template is the image from my laboratory. Other images I have taken from the web. And this is also from my laboratory. One of my students have taken the titanium foil, dipped into HF and did some chemistry. So there is a etching of the HF and simultaneously oxidation. So we get the formation of titanium nanotubes. So the surface gets corroded or eroded in the form of tubes. And the upper ones are the polyaniline fibers coated with the gold nanoparticles. So in environmental scanning electron microscope, rest of the things are same. You require an electron source, lenses, focusing lenses, scanning lenses. Only the sample chamber is at nearly atmospheric pressure. It is not at 760 millimeter of Hg or 760 torr or 1000 millibar. It is nearly, means it can be 10 torr, 1 torr, 0.1 torr, depending on the kind of sample. So that the sample can sustain that pressure. So the rest of the column is under low pressure. Only the sample chamber is at the nearly atmospheric pressure. So you can focus the beam on the sample. So in this case, the detectors are different. When the electron falls on the material, secondaries will be emitted. But we know that if the pressure is nearly atmospheric or maybe 1 torr or 10 torr or 0.1 torr, even then the molecular density is large. So this secondary, they collide with the residual gas atoms. And since the detector is biased, means they are accelerated, they gain the kinetic energy. So they ionize the residual. So again a secondary will be generated. It will collide with the So slowly you will have a ionization of the residual gas, and the secondary signal will build up and it will reach the detector. So this is called as the gaseous secondary electron detector. Interestingly, the positive ions, they get attracted to the sample. Now, in case if the sample is non-conductive, what is going to happen? The primary beam, when it arrives, it will impart some negative charge. So these ions will neutralize this charge. So even for non-conductive sample, you don't have to coat it with the conducting layers. The secondary ions, the gaseous ions will neutralize, and then once they neutralize, they appear as a gas species, and again they will get ionized due to the emission of secondaries. So you get an image formation. And for biological sample, there is a particular recipe what you have to follow to prepare the sample, and then you can image them. So these are some of the typical images. A human red blood cell, RBC, which looks like a donut. The another important microscope is a transmission electron microscope. So here the acceleration potential or the energy with which the electrons are accelerated is quite high. It ranges from 80 keV to 200 keV or 300 keV, very large amount of kinetic energy. Then and then it is possible for the electrons to pass through the material. So the name itself tells that the transmitted electrons will be used to generate the image. As compared to the scanning electron microscope, here we have added number of lenses. An objective lens is always there, but here we have an intermediate lens and a projector lens. So the intermediate lens is used to switch the TM between the imaging mode and diffraction mode. And this is a construction of the condenser lens. So there is not only a single construction lens, there is a series of or 2 or 3 condenser lenses are there. So they are used to thin the beam to a large extent. And there are also mechanical aperture used, means mechanical aperture means small holes drilled in the foils so that the electron beam can pass through these holes. Then there is another kind of lenses called as projector lenses. They are used to magnify the image formed by the intermediate lens onto the viewing screen. They consist of cylindrical spot metal core with a hole drilled through it. In this case, the image formation or the contrast is of 2 types. One is called as the mass contrast, another is called as the phase contrast. And in addition to this mass contrast or phase contrast, as the electrons are passing through the solid or the sample, if you consider the electron as a wave, it means that these waves are traveling through the material. So these waves will undergo diffraction, and this mode of imaging is called as the electron diffraction and termed as selected area diffraction or electron diffraction, SAED. So this is a kind of mass contrast mechanism. So suppose you have a sample which has variable mass density. Somewhere the mass is higher in some region the mass is lower. So as the electron beam is passing through the material, so it will be scattered more where the mass is more, and it will get scattered less where the mass is less. So as a result, on the detector, you will get the contrast. So the thicker region will appear as a darker and the thinner region will appear as a lighter. You can also alter this contrast, what is called as the bright field and dark field image. Means depending on the focusing, depending on the uh, intermediate lens and projection lens focusing, you can convert the dark field into bright field or bright field into dark field. Means the thicker material can appear as a bright, or it can remain as a it can appear as a dark. An important feature which lacks in the scanning electron microscope is the high resolution mode or imaging mode, which is called as HRTM. So this is due to the phase contrast. So this contrast, as I told you, that the electron behaves as a wave, and these waves, they interfere with each other. So depending on whether there is a constructive interference or destructive interference, you get the lattice diffraction image. And also a selected area electron diffraction image. So in TM, there are three kind of peculiar images observed for the electron diffraction mode. You can get a very clear spotted intensity on the detector with some kind of symmetry as per the sample crystalline nature, or you may find formation or observation of rings on the detector, or the intensity diffusing or degrading with not very good contrast like spots or rings. So accordingly, one can get the first hand information that if we get spots, then the material is single crystalline in nature. If you get the diffraction pattern in the form of rings, then you can say that the material is polycrystalline. And if there is no well-defined contrast, you confirm that the material is amorphous. So mostly the electronic cameras like CCD cameras are equipped with the TEM, but to see the image with the eye or the operator, a cathodoluminescence phosphor screen is also attached. So there is a provision that you can switch the image formations, means you can flip the, or you can take away the phosphor screen so that the input will given to the CCD camera, or you can bring the phosphor screen and look at the image using your eyes, or you can use the cameras also, photographic camera. Here also there is a probability that X-rays will be generated. So you have also EDS or EDS attached to the TEM. You can also scan the sample during the TEM imaging. So that is called as STEM, scanning transmission electron microscopy. In addition, you can also measure what is the loss in energy when the electrons are transmitting. So this is called as electron energy loss spectroscopy, or EELS. But for EELS, you require very sophisticated spectrometers, energy spectrometers, and the cost is very huge. It goes in crores. So very rarely you get a TEM with ILS attachment unless it's a very good institute doing surface science studies or basic studies. So they have the TEM with ILS. Otherwise, you have to get only TEM as a standalone. Another imaging mode is called tomography, where you can generate the three-dimensional models of samples by capturing the images on time scale and then superimposing that you can get the three-dimensional image that is called tomography. For a cryo TEM, you have to use a low dose because the biological samples should not get destructed due to the very high intensity and high kinetic energy. So the intensity as well as the energy is minimized for the biological or soft samples. Since the electrons need to be transmitted, you cannot use any material for imaging in transmission electron microscopes. So usually it should be thin. How thin? Or what should be the thickness? So the thickness should be less than 100 nanometer. And if your material is not less than 100 nanometer, then you have to do some kind of treatment so that it can be made thinner in a particular area. And for that, you can use the ion Miller. So prior to ion Miller, actually you have to do the mechanical polishing for metallurgical samples like steels. First, there is a mechanical polishing, then some electrochemical polishing, then dimple formation, and then you get the ion milling. So you use argon ion beams, two argon ion beams in an inclined manner so that there is a sputtering and atoms from the defined area will be removed so that the thickness in the given area becomes smaller. So you can use this for your solid materials. For powder materials, you have a carbon coated copper grids, 200 mesh or 100 mesh. You have to disperse this powder materials, nanomaterials, or whatever you want to see in a particular solvent and put 1 or 2 drops of this dispersion on the copper grid and let it dry overnight, and then you can use this copper grid for imaging the sample. Remember, unless there is a Lorentz microscope, a set of lenses attached near the pole pieces, you cannot use the magnetic samples for imaging. So it is very important for the user that he or she has to first ask the TEM operator whether the TEM is compatible for the magnetic materials or not. If there are no Lorentz lenses available with the system, and if you deliberately said false information or given false information that there is no magnetic material, this material is no magnetic material, and you can image it. So if it is the powder material, what is going to happen, since the magnetic field used in the scanning coil and for the focusing of the electron beam is very intense, this magnetic powdered material particles, they can get attracted and they will sit on the pole pieces. So once they segregate on the pole pieces, it's not only for one sample, but if you run it for say 100, 500 samples, so there is enough segregation of magnetic materials, and this magnetic particles, they will influence the focusing of the beam, because there is change in the applied magnetic field and the actual magnetic field seen by the electron beam, and lose the focusing, or you will lose the operation of the TEM. You will not be able to focus the electron beam onto the sample, and the gap between the pole pieces is so narrow that it is very difficult to get these particles out from the pole piece. So you have to dismantle the entire column and do the treatment again. So it is a huge task. So my humble appeal, sincere appeal to every researcher is that I was in charge of the TM facility of our machine. So I used to take undertaking from unknown person that this is not a magnetic sample. Once or twice, I have confirmed the non-magnetic nature of the material indirectly from the scanning electron microscopy. Means I have taken those samples and did the EDAX using a ACM, and I have confirmed that it doesn't contain iron, nickel or cobalt like that. And then I have done those or analyzed this sample using TEM. So if you are interested in doing the TEM analysis of your samples which are magnetic, then these TEM, dedicated TEMs are available in ISC Bangalore or even in DAE CSR Indore Center, Consortium for Scientific Research, Indore Center, and they are very well cooperative, means they can provide you the fare also, they will allot you the time, so you can make use of these facilities. These are some of the images obtained on our TM. So these are the ultra thin sheets of graphene. These are chemically prepared. It's not a mechanically exfoliated, but you can see the quality. They are ultra thin. Then one of the student has made a CDS nanostructures which look like a comb. So we have named it nanocombs, and on the right hand corner you can see you have a lattice row. So these are the atomic rows, and the distance is 0.67 and 0.33 nanometer, which corresponds to particular interplanar distances. So this is the potential of TEM, that you can see the atomic rows or lattice image. So you don't have to take the XRD. And this is an example of bright field and dark field image. The left hand corner shows you the dark field where the Ceria particles on the ZNO nano needles are not observed. But if you go to the dark field image, then due to the contrast between ZNO and Ceria, Ceria appears brighter. So you can clearly see the decoration of Ceria particles on the zinc oxide nanoneedles. Now every microscope has aberrations, that is errors. There are major two kinds of errors. One is spherical aberration, another is chromatic aberration. And on the right hand side, you can see the graph resolution and the time scale. So it was expected by around 2000 one can achieve resolution of 1 angstrom unit. why we cannot get a resolution higher than 1 angstrom unit, or why there is a saturation. So the limit to the resolution is due to aberrations, a noise or error. Now in case of optical microscope, the spherical and chromatic aberration. Spherical aberration comes from the lenses, and the chromatic aberration is due to the distribution of wavelengths in the source. If the source is not monochromatic, you have a chromatic aberration, and depending on the lens defects, you get the spherical aberration. So in optical microscope, it is very difficult to minimize or reduce the chromatic and spherical aberration to a certain level. Beyond that, you lose the resolution, means the noise or error is comparable to the measurement. But in case of electron microscope, since you use electromagnetic lenses, there is a probability that by arranging the lenses in a particular manner, you can minimize the aberrations. And this kind of electron microscope, particularly the transmission electron microscope, is called as CSCC, chromatic and spherical corrector or aberration corrector microscope. So this is the aberration corrected microscope, AM. So from external side, it looks like a black box, and internally you can see what is there inside. So this is 300 keV machine from Titan, made by FEI. Joule also makes this kind of microscopes from Japan. So here you can get a bit of higher resolution, an order of higher resolution as compared to the uncorrected or not aberration corrected microscope. But the cost is very large or a huge one. Now the question is, can we use ions? If you asked the question in 90s or 2000, the answer was no. But from last decade, we have an ion microscope, that is helium ion microscope. It's not only a microscope, it is a nano machining tool offered as Orion NanoFab. It's a sub 10 nanometer nano machining with multiple ion beams. So just the basic difference between ion and electron is the mass. They bear the same charge. Singly charged ion and an electron, they will have the same magnitude of electric charge. But ion is massive. So it means that if you throw an electron, then how many secondaries you can generate? And if you throw an ion, how many secondaries you can generate? So obviously, when you have massive particle hitting, the secondary yield is higher. So you can thin down the incident beam. In case of electron, the size of the incident beam also limits the resolution. If you thin the beam less than 5 nanometer diameter, the intensity what you receive on the sample is lesser. Less the intensity, less will be the interacted output. So the contrast will be lost. But in case of ions, if you thin the beam diameter, even then, since these are massive particles, they will have enough secondary yield so that the contrast can be retained. So that is the advantage. Now this instrument looks very pretty, but it's very complex. How you get the ion beam formation? And here the party has claimed you have 3 ion beams available for 3 different purposes. One of them you can use it for imaging, another for some lithography, another from some say manipulation, like that. The ion beam generation is via the field ionization mode. Similar to field electron emission, there is a field ionization. So in field emission, what we do, we have the sample bias at negative potential, but if the same sample, the very fine needle, if you bias at a positive sample, and if I have some gas in the vicinity, and if I pull this tip, then I can see the surface atoms of this tip on the screen. That is called as the field ion microscope. So what you see here, the 6 atoms in the periphery and 3 atoms in the center primer, these are the atoms on the extreme surface of the tip. So there are only 3 atoms in the topmost layer, and there are then 6 atoms seen down the layer. So from each atom, there will be a field ionization of helium atoms, and these ions will be then accelerated towards the sample to do the imaging or to get the manipulation or machining kind of thing. So this is what you see. It's the field ion image of the tip showing the atomic positions. So this machine, 1 or 2 machines have been installed in India. At present, I don't exactly remember the institute, but it is somewhere in Aisar Mandi or in the north side. So this is what I was referring to, field ion microscope. This was the first microscope which displayed image of a solid surface on atomic scale. Means we can see the atoms. Again, for students, if there are student participants, how do you understand this question? I can see an atom. So here, the context of looking or seeing is very different. If you ask what is the physical size or shape of an atom, nobody has this information. Whether the atom is spherical, what is the exact dimension, or it is an ellipsoid or triangular. No, the physical size and shape of an atom is unseen, because we talk about the probabilities. What is the probability that the outer shell electron will be found? So that defines what is the average size of the atom. But if you ask me whether an atom is present at a particular position, so I can 100% assure you that yes, the atom is present at a particular position, or it is not present at that position. Just a simple analogy, you are delivering a lecture in front of, say, 1 lakh students or 1 lakh people in a pendal. So there are 1 lakh chairs. Are you able to see a student present in the say 1018 row and 1015 column? No. From the stage you cannot see whether that chair is, or when atom means when whether a student is occupying that place or not. No. But if you put a sensor to the chair, then electronically you can confirm that whether that seat is empty or vacant. So without physically identifying who is sitting there, electronically you can have a signature whether that seat is empty or seat is occupied. Similarly, if you detect a signature of presence of an atom at a particular site, you confirm whether atom is present at that particular position or not. So it is not a physical looking or physical seeing. It is the detection of presence of an atom and its signature. If an atom is present, it will have some kind of interaction. So if you map the interaction, from the interaction, you can confirm, yes, atom is there. Means I can see an atom.